Welcome back to another episode of Inside Indiana Overtime. Kind of a new look,
Overdrive.
overdrive, whatever you want to call it that. Kind of a new look and obviously a new sound here tonight. This is not John Bauernfeind. This is Mike Miller of the Bloomington Herald-Times. He's joining us because John is a little bit under the weather, and I think he's doing pretty well tonight. As are the Hoosiers after beating a Savannah State team. Basically in the way that everyone expected them to beat them. Indiana won 95-49. And it was ugly for the first 9 or 10 minutes maybe, and then Indiana just kind of turned on the Jets, was the more talented team, and just totally ran away from the Tigers.
I think it was like a 26-5 run over the last 10 minutes of the half.
Something
like
along
that.
those lines, where Savannah State didn't have a field goal in the last 5.5 minutes. They only scored on 2 of their final 23 possessions in the first half, and Indiana did what was expected of them on a day when a ranked Michigan team lost at home to New Jersey Institute of Technology, when Purdue lost to North Florida. Oohs all around the Big Ten, but not here in Bloomington because Indiana kind of took care of business, and it's probably a refreshing sight for Indiana fans to see an Indiana game where they got what they expected instead of kind of not really knowing which Indiana team's going to show up.
Because we've seen that at times this year. We've seen on at least a couple occasions when this team is it's kind of cliche, but they just sort of lack that killer instinct to put teams away when they get up by double figures. We saw it against Lamar, and then we saw it against UNCG. That was a weird one. I mean, it was a win, but it felt like a loss
It really
because
did.
they came back and made that a ball game in the last 5 minutes. So Indiana, you mentioned it. They did what they had to do, and they did it well enough to win by what? A million points? 40?
It felt like it. It felt like it was over pretty. 46
points. Yeah.
Math majors here. And there were plenty of contributing factors to tonight's game. Yogi Ferrell played really well at 18 points. So did James Blackman. But one of the more interesting kind of storylines to follow this week has been Emmett Holt, who had his huge game against Pitt with 15 points, and then tonight he was the first guy off the bench and ended up having a pretty good night. I mean, not a huge breakout kind of thing that he had before, but it was almost more encouraging than his one against Pitt because it proved that he can kind of replicate a solid front court performance on both ends of the floor in back-to-back games, which is something that Indiana desperately wants.
Consistency, because it's certainly something they don't get a lot of,
Right.
a lot of out of Hunter Mascara-Perea. And it was consistency in a good way, not necessarily because he was scoring points or grabbing rebounds. Those are all important, obviously, but he's just always in position. And for a freshman who enrolled in school here 6 days before classes were set to begin, the development arc of Emmett Holt has just been extremely impressive. Just his understanding, his intuition of knowing where to be on both sides of the floor leads to the easy baskets, the easy just lay-ins on, little dump-off passes. And then he's always in position for those very important boards. He's altering shots, he's getting blocks. So just the fact that he understands where to be on the floor, I think, is probably the most encouraging thing for me.
Yeah, and among the encouraging signs for Indiana was the play of Stan Robinson too. He didn't play a whole lot, and maybe he scored a little bit, but really the encouraging thing was his decision making tonight and his kind of he had career high 5 assists, and it looked like he was kind of figuring out where he fits on this team, which has been a struggle for him. I mean, he's just suspended the first 4 games, and then so far just hasn't really found his niche with this team until
As
tonight.
It seems like
right.
everyone else on the bench that's going to play minutes is sort of found a role. Colin Hartman has his role. Emmett Holt has his role. Nick Zeisloft has his role, kind of a role that's stealing minutes away from Robinson too. So it was good for Robinson, and it was important for Robinson to sort of have this night to just have something positive to build on, because as we've seen over his first couple appearances after the suspensions, a lot of mistakes. He's almost feels like he's trying to do too much on the floor to try to impress. And then with that, he seems like he's pressing as those mistakes pile up and just sort of compound on top of each other. So definitely good just for him to have a positive result tonight.
Yeah, no kidding. And it's an encouraging game, an encouraging week for Indiana after beating Pitt the other night. They take kind of this momentum and they go into Madison Square Garden on Tuesday night at 9-ish to play a Louisville team that's, I think, ranked 5th right now and looks to be deserving of that kind of rank. They've looked impressive really in every in the short exposure I've had to them. Montrezl Harrell looks like he's going to be a handful for Hunter Perea and Emmett Holt, to say the least. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, Indiana hasn't seen anything close to this caliber of basketball yet.
No.
I mean, Montrezl Harrell is going to be, a handful.
Yes.
And that defensive,
very large handful.
Very large handful. And that defensive pressure is going to really probably will give Indiana some problems. I mean, just the way they press, the way they come at all different angles, always seems like there's at least 1 or 2 guys on the ball at all times. So this is going to be, like you mentioned, they haven't seen anything like this quite yet.
Right, and Mike's going to be there, actually. We won't have anyone there. but we'll be covering it from afar as we always do. Until then, thanks so much for watching, Mike.
Overdrive.
Thanks for having us on. Thanks for being on again.
On Inside Indiana Overdrive.
Overdrive. And on that note, have a good week and enjoy all of your holiday parties and whatnot.